This was not a good month books-wise. There is a very high chance that I would choose wonderful but very long books next month, and this video is going to be even shorter. But before that, let's talk about what I read this month. Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield was a total waste of time. It has a decent enough inciting incident. A man stumbles into a pub with a dead girl in his arms who then comes alive, and no one can really identify her since there are like 3 missing little girls that she could or could not be. I didn't find it particularly exciting, but I was willing to write this mystery out. But from the very start, the author has very little understanding as to what's actually important in her story. She gives all of her characters' backstories, one right after the other, without any explanation as to who they are and what role are they playing in the story. And so about half of the book passes before we come back to the pub and the little girl. And there is value to storytelling like this, when you tell stories of different people and only by the end it is revealed how it's all interconnected. It's not executed that well here. Some of those connections are revealed at the very end with the aha reveal, and that's probably for the best. But the others are just encountered over the course of the story, not in an interesting way. And the Easter eggs that the author tries to plant are so obvious that's not even funny. The narrative also constantly loses track of its characters. Like the man who brought the little girl in, he is brought back up again after like 10 different backstories, and he is a bit character in the end. So you spend the book reading, like getting more frustrated as more characters revealed, and you have no idea how they are connected to the story and what role are they playing here. Also, the author has this annoying habit of revealing those backstories through a monologue or an inner monologue. So again, it's a lot of the characters telling each other, this is why I am the way I am. And realistically, the rule show don't tell applies not only to visual mediums, but in books too. The suspense over the identity of the little girl doesn't work either. She is a MacGuffin who simply gets passed from one set of adults to another. And in a way, it is the point. If the book has a theme, which it doesn't, it is about dealing with loss and heartbreak. So it's not about the little girl, as it were, but about what she brings out in adults around her. Okay, fine, but I don't think that we explored it all that much. The characters themselves are more caricatures. For example, there is a female doctor who has seen so many childbirths and women growing through terrible complications through it that she vowed never to go through that herself until she meets a man who changes her mind. That's the depth of character work that we're dealing with here. There are a couple of characters in there who are straight up villains, simply because they are, and a couple of virtuous characters saving kittens and feeding orphans, also for no apparent reason. And characters like that are not interesting to watch because you already know what they're going to do in any given situation. What character growth can we scrounge up from them? Apparently the story is supposed to be fantasy or magical realism. Not really. There is one fantasy element, and my feeling is that the author should have leaned more into that angle, because if it is fantasy, then even the black and white characters would be more appropriate. But the author wants to have her cake and eat it too, because the fantastical elements are never confirmed as such. They could just be the disturbed images in the confused mind of its characters that they rationalize away. And for me, that fantastical storyline is the most interesting and cohesive. So there is that. Overall, I was mostly bored with this book, and it's quite hefty, about 500 pages, so I was bored for a very long time. There are a couple of character resolutions that I went for like, oh, that's nice, but not more than that. So my verdict, don't waste your time. Amsterdam by Ian McEwan ultimately was kind of interesting. I only got what the author was trying to do about midway through, so the first half was a little off for me. We follow 2 friends, one a renowned composer, the other a magazine editor, and both of them are terrible people. The book opens with a funeral of a woman who was their lover, and the way that they talk at that event should have clued me in straight away. McEwan explores the questions of morality with the both of them. Over the course of this relatively short story, both of them perform an action that is totally morally reprehensible, like truly awful, and neither sees it as such. Both try to call each other out on it, but neither budges on this, so there is an interesting tension there. Both of those events catch up to them in different ways, and the ending is something completely different, also questioning the morality angle. I'm not going to tell you what it is. The Russian summary actually spoiled it for me, kinda. That wasn't nice. But there is also a twist even after that. And I did enjoy the morality angle, how twisted these characters are, how they do not see what they've done as terrible, how they rationalize it away, or don't even. The ending was a little bit forced for me. I enjoyed the twist after the ending, but that didn't make much sense or wasn't set up properly for me. There is, however, a problem with this story that ultimately made me dislike it, and that is that the author just simply won't shut up. Weird complaint, but he constantly goes on these highty-tighty rants and tangents that the essence of the book is completely lost. Because I'm now struggling to remember what they were actually about, but I know for a fact that they had nothing to do with the main storyline or theme. At the worst moments, it just sounded like the author is trying to sound smart, and that's the only reason for his yapping. I read a Russian translation, so I cannot say for sure, but there were so many big words used that after a while my brain simply was like, what are we doing here? You're not making any sense. It's like that joke about overusing the thesaurus to the point where sentences just don't make sense anymore and you come off as an uneducated douche. And because of these pseudo-intellectual ramblings, the main storyline suffers for it too, because it is constantly interrupted for it, and the asides have nothing to do with the main storyline, so the narrative structure is not there. And also, thus, the main storyline has less time, and I feel like we could have dug more into these characters as to whys and hows of them. I would have enjoyed it more. But as it is a miss for me. Here, I was totally misled by The Glass Bees by Ernst Jünger, or rather the publisher who reprinted it recently. With the advent of AI and new technologies, they thought it would be topical. It is, but not in any interesting way. The book tells a story of a washed-up man who seeks employment with a new eccentric tech genius who, amongst other things, invented these glass bees for pollination purposes, I guess. When the man, Richard, arrives at the highly secure tech facility of the genius Saperoni, he is put to the test as to the suitability for the job, and the test is kind of messed up. The book was actually written about the middle of the last century by an old man who longs for simpler times, and it shows. There are so many reasons to be wary of new technologies, both 100 years ago and now, and the book explores none of them. And again, the book is labeled as sci-fi, but there is precious little about these new technologies and how they would affect the lives of people. There is even a grain of dystopia in there, because one of the Zipperoni's inventions are puppets who've replaced actors, and in general his technologies they permeate the society, but Richard as a character doesn't see beyond we used to ride horses and that was cool, but now there are cars and they are not. I wanted to look at this world, how these technologies affected it, but instead I got this whining of an old military vet who was trained in this on-the-ground combat, but then tanks came along and had no place anymore. He constantly thinks to his training days, how they used to be men with principles, with a moral code. He constantly brings up a general, I think, of his, who he believes to be this ideal, and it's all toxic masculinity. I haven't seen it displayed so unapologetically in a while. And not just unapologetically, but also unaware. The author doesn't see any issues with what he's transmitting here. This "men used to be men" rhetoric is the backbone of this book, but it is also delivered in such a whiny and naggy way that it became unbearable pretty quickly. Honestly, as soon as he brought up Taras Bulba as a role model, I should have quit. So no, it is not sci-fi, it is not a dystopia, it's simply an old man's ramblings about the good old days, while also shitting on new things, so I'm not the audience for this. Now, 3 books within a month were complete misses, and we're not even counting Mother by Gorky, so I've decided to stick with the authors who wouldn't let me down, so I've chosen French. I've wanted to reread Bel Ami for a while now. I read it in high school, and I know for a fact that my reading experience now would be completely different. But since I've already wasted so much time on Once Upon a River, so I didn't have enough time left in a month to actually finish Bel Ami, so I've chosen a shorter story novella by Guy de Maupassant. Boule de Suif, translated in many offensive ways, so we will stick with dumpling, is actually the debut novella for Maupassant, and it actually shows a bit. I did enjoy it. It's once again exploration of morality. The plot is centered around a prostitute and some aristocrats stuck in a carriage together while they are escaping the Franco-Prussian War. And it actually shows the hypocrisy of the nobility, who are also willing to accept favors from those who they deem to be beneath them, or even extort from them, really, but also showing gratitude or simple, human decency seems to be beneath them too. You can see why the French Revolution happened. And yeah, it plays out exactly like that. These noblemen using this woman of the night, I guess, for their own purposes in many different ways. You can actually see that de Maupassant is a young author here, because the parallels in the messaging a little bit on the nose, but I will take it. Honestly, the main thing that I want from stories like this is to feel emotionally connected, and here I was. Because with Amsterdam, for example, I felt the revulsion towards the characters, but I wasn't connected. And here I was. I felt for Dumpling, the chubby prostitute, whom the translation constantly called fat and fatty. I felt for her, and I hated these noblemen who mistreated her and treated her so poorly and used her and abused her and all of that. So yeah, it's a good little story about the hypocrisy of people and maybe a lesson not to be so gullible. The only true marker of the epoch, and that's a little bit of a downside, is that Maupassant spends a lot of time setting the scene of the Franco-Prussian War and all of that. And yeah, that's what happens when you pay your authors by the word count. Because honestly, the setup of the Franco-Prussian War was needed for the conflict of the story to work, but it could have been done so much more efficiently. Another French author that I've chosen for this month was Françoise Sagan. I read a lot of Sagan in my youth, and I've chosen a story that I do not remember reading at all, The Steel Storm. But apparently I have a copy, so yeah, not a single memory of it. Whoops. And actually, I remember Sagan writing more about the early 20th century. This book is set early 19th century, which was surprising. Not a bad thing off the bat, but simply surprising. And it turned out to be a very Sagan story. The narrator and the main character is a man who suffers from unrequited love, and the lovers that he fails to get between, they also suffer a very tragic fate. There is something weird about the narrative structure of this book, because Sagan spends a lot of time setting the scene, and since the narrator is seemingly writing down his memories, that's the narrative structure of this, he's constantly reaffirming, teasing us that something terrible is going to happen, something terrible is going to happen. But then all of the terrible things actually happen in the epilogue, and it's 2 sentences. The first-person narration both helps and doesn't, because we only get Nicholas's focus and his account of the events, so that leaves a lot of ambiguity to the nature of Gildas's and Flora's relationships, that's the couple. And I think that's the strength of Sagan, actually. She never gives us complete answers to all of our questions. Nicholas also, he's not terrible as a jilted lover could potentially be. He's not a good guy, but not an incel either, so there is that. The only thing that I didn't particularly like about this book is the third act villain. That character was not developed and felt very cartoonish. And also the entire thing is resolved in the epilogue, almost like an afterthought. Overall, not Sagan's best, but fine enough. I really need to choose a good book to sink my teeth into. I've already started Bel Ami, so that's a spoiler for next month for you there. Is it called Bel Ami in English? What would you call him? Good friend? Or friend of mine? I guess so.